Exoneration. Exonerate. Exoneration. He was exonerated from all responsibility for the accident. Peter was exonerated after he proved someone else stole the cookies.
He was exonerated from all responsibility for the accident. Peter was exonerated after he proved someone else stole the cookies.
So I don't want to exonerate the Russians for the irresponsibility and so on, and the lack of good strategy.
So many of your attempts to exonerate yourself or your friends will be dismissed as mansplaining.
First of all, let me tell you that I cannot exonerate you no matter what you do. I like to think of myself as very
Your job is not to exonerate failure when it's caused by negligence or bad will.
We started to look for DNA evidence that might exonerate Bill and point to the person who actually killed Pam.
Now, in 1989, we had the first DNA exoneration in the United States.
President, if he could consider the exoneration of Marcus Garvey.
15 years, he had at least one exoneration or exclusion of DNA.
Exoneration is the closest to what we usually think of when we say forgiveness. Exoneration is wiping the slate entirely clean and restoring a relationship to the full state of innocence it had.
I'm a proponent of supporting any foundation.
And he was a forward-thinking proponent of the great threat to the United States was the Islamic.
And I have long been a proponent of trying to think about more inclusive curricula.
Policy I'm a huge proponent of is giving people the opportunity when they file their income tax return.
I'm a huge proponent of all of us being interdependent.
Yes. The choice for me was always going to be public education because I'm a very big proponent of public education.
I'm a major proponent of using technology.
Rigor. Rigorous. Rigorously. Rigorousness. The utmost rigor of the law. Intellectual rigor. The rigor of Arctic winter. The rigor of prison life. Rigorous discipline. A rigorous search. A rigorous examination. A rigorous climate. Becca's anatomy class was so rigorous only half the students passed.
The utmost rigor of the law. Intellectual rigor. The rigor of Arctic winter. The rigor of prison life. Rigorous discipline. A rigorous search. A rigorous examination. A rigorous climate. Becca's anatomy class was so rigorous only half the students passed.
The claim was that with enough rigor and devotion, such schools...
We need you to be involved in the schedule and rigor on a day-to-day basis of something that's
actually a significant amount of scientific rigor yet to be understood.
That kind of rigor is more helpful than a sort of a general permissiveness about creativity.
And this is where I got my high school did not offer AP Calculus or did not offer it at a rigorous level, and this is where I got the rigor so that when I got to one of these schools.
And so lastly, we will strengthen academic rigor and enhance learning outside the classroom.
Give that opportunity to build in the rigor and the skill building that you're talking about. So one of the
Academy makes such rigorous demands on parents that it disproportionately retains the most highly motivated families.
Generation of rigorous evidence, not just for accountability and to say, oh.
But we'll do it in a much more rigorous, well-controlled manner if we can demonstrate that people can lose.
Before they were able to tackle some of the more rigorous academic courses. And
it's at a rigorous level. We don't water down the content.
That I reported. Our questions, again, were as rigorous and objective as possible. So
responsible of us not to rigorously test our designs when so many people are counting on us to get it right.
I try to stick very, very, very rigorously to documented facts.
First period in which law began to be studied rigorously as a discipline, and that goes back.
Clause, which at the same time was being rigorously protected.
Stoma to say, we're going to do every single step as rigorously as we possibly can. And
retention, retentive, retentively, retentiveness. Her limited powers of retention. Show an amazing retention of facts. Show an amazing retention of childhood retention. The retention of flood waters. The retention of crow. Suffer from retention of urine. Retentive soil. Billy has trouble with retention, he never remembers the periodic table.
Her limited powers of retention. Show an amazing retention of facts. Show an amazing retention of childhood retention. The retention of flood waters. The retention of crow. Suffer from retention of urine. Retentive soil. Billy has trouble with retention, he never remembers the periodic table.
And it's amazing to see what the retention rate is.
Soil water retention and soil antibiotic development.
Schools improve standards, teacher and student retention through training materials, on-call support.
And a lot of people, when they forget things, they blame their retention, and it has nothing to do with their retention.
You know, it's a moisture retentive. It kind of buffers the temperature.
To ensure the retention of the bite rim, create a retentive pattern into the uncured acrylic on.
Becoming really concrete about what happens when you remove water from water retentive landscapes.
So I imagine that it's fairly similar, but maybe more kind of anal retentive or something. I don't know.
101 on Whole30.com that lays out my incredibly anal retentive travel plan because I travel so much and it's really important to me.
Highly technical agreement. Some have called it anal retentive, but that was the point.
She had an extremely quick mind and retentive memory.
Detach. Detached. Detachable. Detachment. Detach a link from a chain. A detached mind. A detached judgment. Take a detached view of. Her detached response to the crisis. A detachable lining in code. The detachment of units from the main force. He answered with an air of detachment.
Detach a link from a chain. A detached mind. A detached judgment. Take a detached view of. Her detached response to the crisis. A detachable lining in code. The detachment of units from the main force. He answered with an air of detachment.
Sort of detach their jaws like a great white as well. I hadn't realized.
It's the understanding that we only when we detach from the projection.
If you're an artist and you sort of detached yourself from reality.
Because we have this tendency to detach ourselves in the West from other.
Pass that arm's gonna carry you too far. Listen to my voice.
There are other people who are more detached. And they're not really engaged with life in the same way. They kind of float through it.
Those voters are now so totally detached from traditional normative.
Yeah, kids are increasingly detached from the natural world.
Very detached from reality and also incredibly isolated.
But they're quite detached. These songs are quite detached from today's prisons.
We are detached from our own history, not only our own family histories, but our history as a people.
Separation and detachment of populist voters both in Europe and in the United States.
With detachment, when detachment contradicts, to act.
Whether or not they were talking about a detachment of Saudi ground combat troops.
To a detachment of soldiers
marching in sequence.
Engagement instead of the ironic detachment that maybe most of us associate with memes and other internet conventions.